and get started. Stragglers come in, hopefully they'll fill in here. So, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Steve Shields. I represent the 4th District in Herriman, which is mostly the South Hills, all the way down to Port Rockville, all the way down there. I was asked to serve on a task force with Councilmember Sherry Warren and some staff and some outside consultants we got to come in on. Originally, our mandate was to find a high-speed internet solution for the city of Herriman. We started about 18 months ago, and really quickly we realized that the question or the problem of high-speed internet was just the tip of a really big iceberg of questions we needed to get through.
Can you define high-speed internet? What you're
Yeah, exactly, right? That was one of the questions. What does that mean? How do we get it? And then a whole cascade of questions and problems and concerns that come with all the answers and the potential answers there. So I thought we'd start tonight with, for those of you who haven't seen it, the survey results that we sent out. After we completed our analysis and discussion and review, the task force made a recommendation to the city council. We'll talk about that and how we got there and why. And as a part of kind of a follow-up with that, we wanted to find out what the residents thought about high-speed broadband internet solutions and what that meant. So we'll go through this real quick. I think it'll be a good place to start, and then we will have a little bit further discussion about a few things. So let's start here. All right, so I said this a little bit to some people who were here earlier, that in other cities where they've done surveys like this, talking about broadband infrastructure, they normally get somewhere in the neighborhood of around 300 responses, give or take a little bit. The fact that we got 2,200 full responses, another 200 partial responses, is remarkable. It's an indication of just how big of an issue this is for Herriman City. So this tells you age groups and when they responded. As you can see, we got responses from everywhere, all over the city. It's not just certain areas that have an issue. It's everybody has an opinion about what's going on with high-speed internet, from clear down past Academy Village, all the way up north to our boundary, all the way to the west boundary, and everywhere in between. Even some outside of our city boundary a little bit. So interesting, do you use the internet to work from home? 53% full time. That's a big number, right? And now you're talking, 86, 87% at least part-time work from home. I'm really curious to what that was before March of 2020 and how much has changed. Yeah, it's interesting, right? It says, do you use the internet to learn or do schoolwork from home? You can still see almost 75, 73% say yes. Current internet service provider. Xfinity seems to be the number 1, CenturyLink is number 2, and then other, and people use HughesNet satellite for a few answers there. Primary reason you selected your internet, speed. Number 1 answer. Is that surprising to anybody? That seems to be more important than any other consideration, is how fast that service is and how reliable, right? It's the only available option, is about a fifth. Cost, reliability, whether or not it's bundled with other services, and so on. Download speed. This is interesting. You can see that the majority of our city, 65, about 2/3 of it, is between 100 to 1,000, right? That's where most people are getting their service. Now, my guess is this is what we're paying for, and this is mostly what we're getting. Is that A lot of other people listen. This is what we're getting.
No. That's not true at all. It totally depends on the infrastructure coming into the house.
It's true.
I've got gigabit, and I average about 975 down, and then max out at 40 up.
40 up. And Steve, and I apologize a little bit, that's a little bit of a tongue-in-cheek conversation up there. There are so many variables that go into that. I think that, well, we'll get into that a little bit. But let's just say that I think when we have services, it's usually contracted up to a speeds up to X, and we're usually X minus something. How much do you pay for internet access?
Why are the responses 1,400 when the population was 2,200 at the beginning?
It's how many people responded to this particular question.
So 800 people didn't answer or
Yeah.
don't know what their speeds were?
Yeah, probably didn't know is most, I mean, that's an assumption, but
After they access numbers.
yeah. It's still, 1,400 responses is a huge number. It's a very statistically significant sampling there. Price I thought was really interesting. I mean, you're talking more than 2/3 of our city are paying $60 or more a month. I'm wondering on some of these $100 to $300 a month if that's part of a bundle where they have, phone, internet, cable television, all that kind of stuff, right? So from what we understand, from some of the information we got, is this is probably where most people are. There's still some in this range, but this is where most people are paying for service a month. How satisfied are you with the cost you're paying? So that minus 11 means most people are dissatisfied with the cost. Speed satisfaction. Seems like most people are fairly okay with the speed. Reliability, fairly satisfied. Customer service, kind of a wash. This is where it gets interesting. How interested are you in subscribing to internet services on a city-owned open access fiber network? 2/3 very interested. Put it all together, you're almost 90% at least somewhat interested. How interested are you in a utility model open access network? Again.
Explain that.
So we'll get into this a little bit, but so open access network refers to a backbone network that lots and lots of service providers can use to deliver service. Yeah, exactly. Utopia would be a version of that, where Utopia has owned and constructed the backbone, and then there's a number of service providers that provide service using that backbone. And they have various levels of service and speed and amenities and costs based on a whole lot of different factors there. Yeah, or like an interstate, right? The interstate is the main thoroughfare, and then everybody else has a way to get on and off of there. I won't read through these. There's just some summaries that we got there. I better speak on this so they can hear it on the recording. The bottom line is that our residents seem to favor the idea of a open access, broadband network and a utility-ish model. And it's interesting, that falls in line with the recommendations that the task force made. We'll go off of that real quick.
Steve, you just said broadband.
Yeah.
You said fiber before. So is it fiber or is it broadband? Because it's completely different technology.
Very much so. I think the idea is when you're asking questions, there's a lack of specificity. And so I think that the answers that we get, they indicate certain things, but they're not specific enough to be yes-no answers to other questions, if that makes sense. So that's why I wanted to have a little more in-depth conversation about some of the things that we've discussed and why. So originally, again, our mandate was to find a high-speed internet solution for the city. And quickly we realized that is not such an easy task. High-speed internet, high speed, is kind of a amorphous term depending on your point of view. I mean, if you've been getting AOL, 10 megabyte connection is really fast, right? You're thinking, woo, this is great. That's high speed. 100 is high speed. 1,000 might be high speed. You know, if you're in a big business, you might want 10,000, right? So it's a bit of a relative term. So when we say high speed, how fast does that mean? When you say internet service, is that cable? Is that fiber? Is that wireless? There's a lot of different options there. We didn't ask very much specific questions about that. When you're talking about the solution, is it for some areas of the city? Is it for every area of the city? Is it for every home and business, or is it just for some? Would the city be in a position to pick a winner and a loser among different organizations? Would the city be the only service provider making it a utility, for example, and only giving one service and having a government-owned and government-operated solution? That didn't seem a very good answer. But letting the private industry completely to itself hasn't provided good solutions either. So that led us down a really long rabbit hole of discussions. We went from internet to understanding that a fiber optic broadband infrastructure for the whole city should be part of our considerations. When we say fiber optic broadband network, we're talking about building the backbone network and a connection to every home in the city to not only be able to have high-speed internet, that's kind of an obvious one, but there's a whole list of other services, amenities, enhancements that are benefits to all the residents and to the city because that infrastructure is in place. Let me give you just one example. In our city, we have a system called SCADA, and it is what we use to monitor all of our water stations all around the city. Right now, those things are recording and containing a whole lot of data. And the way that we're accessing that data is through a radio frequency transmitter that has a very short range. So our public works people have to go out with this device and get close to the device, to the SCADA thing, and it will transmit, on a good day, about 10% of all the data it's collecting and all the information that's available. So even though we have all of these sensors and all of this data that can provide us all this information, the city can't get it. We only get this much of it. If we could get all of it, it would allow for enhancements on water usage. Anytime there's a sprinkler that goes down, we'd know about it immediately. Somebody's got a leak at their house, we could probably identify it immediately because you'd see spikes in water usage right away. We can tell when there's floods, when there's valves and gates that need to be opened. And all that can be done instantaneously from a tablet, they don't even have to be on site. Just push a button, gate opens, no more flooding, everything's fine. That's just one of a litany of benefits that come from that. There are solutions for transportation, air quality, first responders and public service. Police can respond more accurately and more timely. Another big one that we talked about is their body cameras that they wear. Right now, those cameras only upload information when they come back to City Hall and it connects to the broadband here, the Wi-Fi. When they're out and about, there are areas of the city where, number one, there's dead zones, so they're not getting data, they're not getting information on their computers, they're not getting real-time updates like they should get. And then number two is the information they're collecting on their body cameras and stuff isn't being real-time recorded back. Luckily, we live in a pretty safe community. We have a great police force that serves our community well. There have been occasions where that lack of quality data and reliable transmissions can cause some delays in responses and could have been a life or death issue. Imagine fire trucks trying to get to a fire and there's traffic lights they have to worry about. A broadband infrastructure can provide solutions for that. We all know in the morning and in the evening trying to get in and out of here because of traffic is insane. And the lights aren't always synced up between our municipality, UDOT, and Riverton's municipality. It's pretty hard to get all those things working on the same track. With a broadband infrastructure, not only can you get real-time traffic data up to the second, but you can actually program the systems to automatically adjust based on traffic levels. So if there's no traffic, the lights will go quick. If there's a trend of traffic, they'll let those things flow a little more. And that's a really needed thing because we just can't build more roads and solve our traffic problems. We've got to be more intelligent about how we're using that. We can go on and on and on and on and on with how it affects transportation and how it affects communications. It's the backbone for 6G, 7G, 8G networks, autonomous shuttles, self-driving cars, all the stuff that we talk about that's the future of society. It all has to run on a fiber optic network. Another issue that we talked about, besides the help to the city, is what enhancements does something like this provide residents? We all know that we would love super fast, reliable, always on, never down, never throttled, free, super internet, right? If we could all get all those things, it would be awesome. We can't get all those things, but we can get a lot of those things. One of the things we were talking about was with a dedicated fiber optic network, there is no throttling. Everybody in your entire neighborhood could all be on at the same time, all streaming 4K videos, no slowdown at all. You get the same up as you do down. Just blazing speed all the time. That's, I think, more than anything, one of the biggest complaints you get is, yeah, I'm paying for this, but in the evenings when everybody's on and they're all doing their homework and they're all watching TV and they're all streaming Netflix and all that stuff, service slows down and it's not what I expected it to be. In my home, I pay for, I'm getting up to 1.4 gig connection. I'm probably averaging to my house a little over 1,000, 1,100. To my devices on a good day, I'm probably getting 700, 800, maybe 900 on a couple devices. And then at night on my TV, on occasion I'll have to buffer a show on Netflix because it's just not fast enough. So, yeah, I know it shouldn't. It happens. Shouldn't, but it does. There are a wide variety of ways to provide solutions when it comes to a fiber optic network. And if I can show you one of the things, go ahead, Don. Yeah.
Even the providers that we have now, Comcast and CenturyLink, they use fiber as a backbone for their networks coming into our neighborhoods. So I don't want anybody to think that just because the city is adopting a fiber optic network or building its own or whatever it is, that doesn't magically mean that we all get infinite speeds to our homes. Whoever's running the network still manages that bandwidth, and just because you have fiber on the ground doesn't mean you have instant, multiple gigabit to every home. You still have to manage. It all funnels down to a pipe somewhere.
Right. So there is so let me put it this way. The thing about a fiber network is it's capable of providing theoretically up to 10 gig speeds with the infrastructure we're going to be putting in, and then we're considering putting in, and if you upgraded that infrastructure, it's potentially up to 40 gig down the road. So.
The big advantage of fiber is that once you have it in the ground, and down the road, somebody comes up with terabit speeds, you don't have to dig out the fiber and put new fiber in the ground, you just have to replace the equipment at the end.
Exactly. Exactly.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but with the open access network, that also opens it up to where there's more competition being available instead of two choices.
Exactly, and that's the point I was trying to make, is that the backbone provides the opportunity to deliver really superior services. In an open access network, there's a wide variety of service providers that will be competing against each other. They would provide various levels of service, bandwidth, hardware that they might put into your house, costs, right? Theoretically, there should be a spectrum of those, and that competition creates choices for residents. They can choose to have a little slower speed at a lower cost, or if they need high speed and are willing to pay for it, they'll be able to get that too. So having competition was a big part of our consideration. But let me explain this. I'm going to have to get off mic, so I'll try and talk loud. We put this in our report to the city, and so I'll share with you. If you want, just so the recording can pick it up. Here, I'll do it this way. It's fine. If on this end of the spectrum you have completely private company solutions, this is where we're at today. Any private company can come in and provide services with a franchise agreement with the city and can install and provide services. Problem is there's not necessarily an economic benefit to going into the ground and bringing fiber optic infrastructure to an older part of town where there's only maybe 1,000 homes. It doesn't pay for itself. So on this end of the spectrum, you're not able to get all the solutions that you might want to get. We can't check enough boxes. On the other end of the spectrum would be a completely public or municipal solution. It's totally government-owned and controlled solution. And all along the spectrum, there's a whole bunch of different options. Right in this area is what I would call public-private partnerships. And there's various compositions of how much public, how much private are going into all these different things. This is where we're at. On this end would be a utility. Everybody has it. Everybody has to pay the fee. There's no choices. Here it is. Here's the cost. Here's the service. End of discussion. Most choices, seemingly fewest choices, right? In Herriman, we probably favor more of this kind of thing than this kind of thing, just generally speaking. As you go along here, there are certain boxes that you're checking and certain boxes you're unchecking in a list of considerations. And we'll talk about these in a little bit. What we as a task force recommended was something closer to this end of the spectrum. It's a public-private partnership in which the city would own and operate the backbone. The operation would be something we would contract with a private company who would operate the network. And then it would be open source to allow 10, 12, 15, 20 different internet service providers to hop on the back of that and provide high-speed internet. Good. Yeah.
A lot of us are probably familiar with Utopia.
Yes.
Where would Utopia fall on that spectrum?
Utopia would probably be here. It's municipal-owned, open-source network. It's just not, it's multiple municipalities, so it's a little more shared than just one municipality. And there's some pluses and minuses with that as well, and we can talk about that a little bit. This is not where I expected when we started out where we would likely find the solution. I think we were surprised that this is where we wanted to make our recommendation. So let me tell you some of the things that we considered. One other part of this public-private partnership. Towards this side, we would have what we would call opt-in solutions, where people would choose to be a part of a network or choose a service provider. The more you go this way, it would be more of an opt-out, meaning it would be, I don't want to say mandatory, it would be something that would be expected for everyone to have and get, with an option to not have to get it if you really didn't want to. Okay, so why would the task force recommend an opt-out private-public partnership more towards a utility model? So I have some notes here I'm going to reference as we talk. So if we were to go down a list of check marks and say, here's our list of all the goals we'd like to achieve for the city, here's some of the things that we considered as a task force. We'd like to have high-speed fiber internet access to every home and business in the city. That was our primary goal when we started. That's the number one. There's a consideration of whether or not you want government making a choice of who's a winner and who's a loser in terms of who would provide a solution and who wouldn't provide a solution. An example of that would be if the city chose to contract with one company only as a provider, i.e. Google. Great network, fiber backbone, awesomely installed. The city wouldn't own and control it, owned and controlled by a private company, and it is only one company coming in and providing a solution, not multiple companies. So we were not necessarily favorable towards the government taking a role of who was going to provide and who wasn't. We also felt like that led us toward a consideration of an open access network. We wanted to be able to create competition in the city. We feel like competition is really important. Competition will lead to perhaps lower costs, higher services, better speeds, all those kind of things. We wanted a broadband infrastructure to support and enhance city operations and services. Some of those things we just highlighted when we were talking here. We considered how fast it could be deployed and activated for residents. That was part of our consideration. We wanted to minimize the financial obligation to the city, meaning how much the city would have to pay to do it. And then secondly, and associated with this, was minimizing the financial risk to the city, meaning we didn't want it to cost a lot, and we didn't necessarily want the city to be the backstop if something went wrong and put taxpayers on the hook for paying for something that might not work. We also didn't want to force a solution on anyone. That's why we moved a little short of the full utility model there. There's some other considerations that I won't go into, but I think those are the highlights. When we went through, we realized, if you go to this side of the chart, the private industry side, it's definitely no obligation to the city, no financial risk to the city. Those are big ones, right? No one's forced. It's completely optional. You can do whatever you want. But then you get into questions of, does it provide a service to every home and business in our community? Not necessarily. Even with some of the other private companies that come in and install, they don't necessarily provide service to everybody. If we as a city chose one particular company to come in and do an installation and provide a service, it's the government picking who gets to come in and who doesn't get to come in. We didn't like that. If you only bring in one company, it's a slight increase in competition, but it's not a lot of new competition. And if they're the only ones with the fiber optic network, they don't really have any competition. It doesn't necessarily provide lower costs. Again, if you don't have a lot of competition, there's no incentive to lower your costs. It wouldn't necessarily provide an infrastructure for the city to own and operate to provide all these other enhancements and services that we're talking about. So this side is great when you're talking about financial risk and obligation to the city and the taxpayers, but it doesn't necessarily solve all our problems. You go to the other side, where it's a total utility. Certainly you can get high-speed fiber to every home. You can get the broadband infrastructure for the city. You could get it done pretty quickly. But when it talks about the financial obligation and risk to the city, you would think this is going to be really high. It's not. If it's a utility, everybody has to pay for it. There's really no risk to the city. It pays for itself.
Are you going to talk about the demarcation costs as well?
Explain your question. I don't know what you mean by that.
I know you can provide fiber access into, like run fiber in front of every home.
Right.
But then the resident has to make the decision to connect. They have to
Right.
make the decision to have hardware installed in
Yeah.
their home.
To
Gives them access.
opt in or opt out, right? One way or the other.
With like Google, it's like Google is putting up the cost to connect you to the network, and they're fronting the cost for that equipment.
Right.
The fully public side might mean that every resident and every business would be required by the city to be connected, to have that demarcation
Yep.
in their premises.
Exactly.
So the opt-in, opt-out would mean, it's not just, yes, I want it, or no, I don't, but who's going to front the cost for the demarcation? Because that could be a couple $1,000s. And
For every house, right. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead. Taking from the street to the house, you mean? Yeah. It's possible. And again, you're just moving a slide up and down this spectrum with various types of solutions. Does that make sense? So if the city's providing it all the way to the home, you're closer to here. If you have private companies pushing it out from the street to the house, you're closer this way. And there's little check marks and pros and cons for every one of those discussions along the way. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, there's ways to offset and defray that cost by, if you opt in, you choose, hey, you're going to do it like the private companies do. You have to do it for a set period of time where it pays for itself. That's one way of looking at it. And two, I wouldn't necessarily say that it's a negative to look at the public because if we're having these open forums and we're being transparent about it, I don't have a problem with my local government having charge as long as I'm involved in the discussion, which, I've watched you guys have this discussion on YouTube. You've been open and frank about what it is and what the pros and cons are. So I think that as long as that's happening, I don't have a problem with going too far to that side, as long as we're having that conversation.
And I appreciate that. And I would say, as long as that was checking all of the boxes, I would be supporting of that. If it's not checking all of the boxes, why would I want this as the answer as opposed to more private industry answers?
There are other tangible benefits to each resident, though, that we haven't discussed yet.
Very much so.
I have automated water at my home, where I have a weather station. I do all sorts of
Yeah.
things to optimize that cost. We're in a water pinch.
Yep.
So if everybody did that, we would be in a better situation. I have neighbors that water 7 days, a week.
You're preaching to Councilmember Orrin over here. She serves on the Water District Board, and that she's looking for all the ways to save water every way we can. But you bring out a really important point as to why the utility side of the discussion has some benefits, and I'm gonna put Sherry out in front here because I can talk about her because she doesn't have the microphone. Sherry leans more libertarian than most people I know. Very in individual rights, private property rights, is strongly motivated for private industry solutions to problems rather than government. Is that fair to say those things? Okay. But when we talked about being able to provide services and enhancements to the entire city, that makes sense as a utility. A small monthly fee that everybody would pay for a service that makes everything better in the city work better and more efficiently at a lower cost, not so bad. Especially if this cost is included in your monthly internet bill. We have an estimate. It's a little dated, because if you did it 2 weeks ago, it's not right anymore.
Trust me, I know, but yeah, because all the technology with linking up patrol cars, linking up
Yeah. So some of that infrastructure already exists. It just can't be utilized because we don't have it. Once we have it, we'll be able to turn on a lot of features that already exist in the hardware that we have. So let me say something yet. The city has not made a decision. We haven't chosen a contractor. We haven't chosen a path. The task force made a recommendation, and that's where we're at. So have we talked to specific contractors about what they can or can't do and how much it won't or won't cost? We haven't gotten to that part yet. We have sent out a request. We call it an intent to negotiate is what we call it. It's gives us a little more flexibility. But essentially it's a solicitation for anybody to come in and provide bids to the city saying, this is what we can do for you. This is what we think it might cost. These are the kind of solutions we can provide. And then it allows us as a city to go negotiate some of those items with them. So,
I was just going to say, when Utopia was first on the scene and presenting to cities, the same question was asked of them regarding, back then it was Quest, but CenturyLink and Comcast, why don't you become a provider on this fiber network? Well, they jealously guard their ownership of their own.
right.
Of their own.
Yeah, and there's,
At 3 levels, private.
So
right.
I would be blown away if they ever agreed to participate in any kind of an open access network.
Yeah. There's pros and cons from both solutions, right? The con is if they spent a lot of money building a network, they don't want to give it up until they've made their money back on it, right? I mean, if it's a money-making system that they have in the ground, they don't want to abandon it. In some cases, we have some HOAs and some communities where they put in fiber in the ground as they were building the community. We don't necessarily want to have to be redundant there. And there's been talks about whether or not we could find ways to purchase the infrastructure that's already there and just tie it in. So we've had conversations about a lot of these different ideas. But where we settled in our recommendation was to have an opt-out public utility model. There would be an open access network that would be constructed and built by a city-owned utility. It would be operated by a private company. It would be funded, the construction of it would most likely be funded by a bond that would not be an obligation to the city or to the taxpayers. The city would not be directly obligated to repay the bond. The bond would be repaid through revenues generated by the utility. Does that make sense? With other bonds, even if they're sales tax bonds or other things, they usually have to be backed up by the city. Meaning, if this particular thing doesn't generate enough revenue to pay for itself, then the city's gonna back it up by paying for it out of our sales tax revenue or our general fund revenues. And we felt like if we were putting our taxpayers at risk, that wasn't a great idea. The other thing is, the estimated cost was, what do we say, 45 million, something like that-ish. It's probably quite a bit more than that is what it would actually be. But let's call it $50 million. If we bonded for $50 million and had a 30-year bond on that, that would obligate the city to make payments on that, and it would tie us up so we couldn't bond for other things that might need to be done. New roads, other infrastructure that need to be created, things like that. And so we didn't like the idea of burdening the city and taxpayers with that obligation. The difference between an opt-in and an opt-out option is that with an opt-in, unless you get a certain threshold of the percentage of the population that opts in and chooses to use this service, the city has to back up whatever falls short. That is not often a problem. The number's usually something like a third. You'd need around a third of the city to say, yes, we want this. But then again, that third may be in older areas and not the newer areas. And they want it, but your neighbors don't, and there's not enough people on your street, and there's just no way to get it down to you. Does that make sense? If there's not enough people on your street that sign up, they're not going to bring it to you. So again, the opt-in sounds like a good idea, but if you don't get that at least 30%, you can't build it out for the whole city. On the opt-out, you start with 100%, and then people would have to choose not to have it installed at their homes with an understanding that if you do it now, it doesn't cost anything. If you wait and want to hook up to the system at a future date, it could cost a ton. $8, $10, $12, $15,000. Because it's easy to do it when they're coming up your street to just run another little branch off. But if they have to come and bring all their machines, come back and dig in your street to run one little cable, it costs a ton of money. So there'll be disclosure, full information about why you would opt out, what the potential consequences of opting in or out would be. Now, this is where, as politicians, as elected representatives, our discussion comes in, and where we have our intellectual, moral, political debates. And that is, in order to make it a utility, there has to be a basic baseline fee that you would charge everybody in the city, except for those who opted out. Let me finish, and I'll get to it. The current model that we've been using suggested a fee of $10 a month. That sounds like a bad idea if you're an elected representative to say, I'm going to tack on a $10 fee to every house in the city of $10 a month. Our taxes just went up like crazy for the school district. Our taxes go up for everything else. It's another $10 fee sucks. I wouldn't want to inflict that on myself or any of my neighbors. The reality is that the total cost of service on this type of an open source network, we've priced it somewhere between $45 and $65 a month, including that $10 fee. If you go back to that survey, what most people in our city are paying for services, this would be a cost savings with the $10 fee. Does that make sense? It's a net benefit. The good thing about doing it this way is that those $10 fees and the people who are signing up are servicing the bond to get it built. That way the rest of the city's tax money is safe. It doesn't have to be spent on a broadband infrastructure. It's spent on roads and police and fire and all the other things we need. Go ahead, Darren.
I'm not going to derail you too much. I just wanted to ask, would there be an option for people who are paying the $10 a month for the basic connection, essentially? Are they going to get...
There would be a basic level of service for that. Exactly. Yeah, it would probably be a little better than that, but there would be a basic level of service that would accompany that $10 fee. So, yeah. It would be very limited, but it would provide email, communications, and things like that, probably not streaming or any of those kind of functions. So, sorry, let's go here and then I'll come back. This would be every resident and business in the city.
The $10 base fee, and then everything above that, that's the playground of the virtual ISPs.
Yes.
Someone can charge $5 and then $12, $15.
Exactly. It's a little more complicated than that. There's a $10 utility fee. There's a piece of it that's a network operator fee. So that would go to pay the company that's going to be operating the backbone. There's a network refresh fee that's included in that. That's like, I think, $6 or $7 a month. And those get collected over time so that as things break down or you want to upgrade or improve the network, the funds are already existed for that. You don't have to raise any more money. The actual internet service providers themselves are like $15 to $25 a month. Something like 18 is about where we're coming in. So all those fees together for what we're considering, pretty robust service, 1 gig, 2 gig, something like that, 60, I think one city who just recently did it, they were getting about $63, their all-in cost. And that's a cost savings for most of the residents, or at least a break even for a superior level of service. So it's not exciting to have to talk about creating a utility district and charging a $10 fee. It's not great. It's not something we would do if there wasn't a net benefit to the city. And the reality is, I could justify it from a city council position of saying, the enhancements to the city, the cost savings, the backbone, the value of a fiber optic network in 20 years from now is going to be the most valuable asset that the city owns, hands down. Dr. Reichert, I cannot think of his first name. He is one of the most preeminent experts on municipal broadband systems in the United States. Testifies before Congress. I don't know if you guys know about Chattanooga, Tennessee. They're like one of the pioneers on municipal fiber optic networks. He was their major consultant. He's helping roll out the 6G test network in Salt Lake, downtown Salt Lake right now, and a bunch of other municipalities across the country. This is the guy. Dr. Rickert says, we have to look at a fiber optic network as an essential utility, just like power, water, sewer. It is going to be absolutely essential to our future. There's limited applications, now beneficial, but limited applications. But we're not gonna get rail out here. We're not gonna get tracks to our community. There's not even a plan anywhere. We have corridors preserved for them, but there's currently no plans in any of the regional transportation or UDOT plans to extend any of those lines out here. And the fact is, it's so expensive to install rail and bring it all, it's kind of dumb anyway. The UDOT was testing at a car show a couple of years ago, these autonomous shuttles. Did you guys see that? It was running back and forth in front of the Southtown Expo Center there, where you hop in, no driver, remember you walk in, went all the way down to one end of the thing, dodged around a couple of obstacles, gets down, opens doors, lets you off. They've been testing that for 2 years already. They just can't deploy it because there's not enough fiber optic network to run it. You put it in, you could run those things up and down Main Street all day. Now you got public transportation, you can get to the track station, you can get to other places. The bottom line is, we as a council are accepting proposals all around here. The task force recommended this solution. I think I've talked about why. Mainly because this option checks all the boxes that we were considering. The other ones check some or most of the boxes, but that's the only one that checks all of the boxes. The big one is, it gets it to every home. It limits the financial obligation to our taxpayers in the city. It gets great service, reliable service, better speeds at a cost that's in line with what everybody's paying right now, if not better.
It also doesn't require the city to be an internet expert.
Exactly.
We have a partner that's the internet expert. That's why we're not doing the full utility model, because then a partner would be the internet expert, and our staff doesn't have to worry about that.
Very well said. We don't have to hire that expertise and create extra payroll burdens for the city to do that. And I like the idea that it also pays for itself as it goes on. It not only services the debt, but it includes money for refreshment and improvement and enhancement automatically on the network as it goes forward. The other thing, once the debt's paid off, it becomes a revenue generator for the city, which means lower taxes. Or probably more appropriately, less tax increases. I mean, let's be real. No, the city of Herriman has never increased our taxes since the city was incorporated, as far as the core tax that the city charges, non-property taxes. We have added a service enforcement area for the police, but you were already paying that tax to the unified police. It's paying it here, but it's saving a ton of money. Same with the fire service, we added that here. But our core tax we haven't changed in 22 years. It's 80, I think mine was $86 a year. So you didn't pay anything to the city for taxes. Sorry, go ahead.
How is this different from what Lehigh's doing?
This is what Lehigh is doing.
So explain, like, how they already bonded and there's no network and they have to pay payments right now? I've heard that's where they're at.
They did not, so their bond that they did was issued by the city. We have been talking with one of the leading bond companies. They're probably the 10 times the largest municipal bond issuer in the country over anybody else. They've been researching and have found a way for us to be able to bond without having it to be on the city's books. You can create a special entity to do the bond. Lehigh just chose not to do it that way. And it's one of the drawbacks of signing on with something like Utopia, which is essentially the same kind of model, right? I mean, Utopia's a good network. My buddy up in Kaysville has Utopia. He loves it. It's super fast. It's great. All the kids can be on their tablets doing their stuff all the time. It's awesome. The downside is the financial obligation side of it. Because when you sign on to Utopia, you're not only covering the cost for your own municipality, but you as a municipality are also on the hook for the cost for every other municipality, whether they're successful or not. And all of the debt that Utopia already has when they bring it to the system. So again, you don't have to pay for it up front. It's easy, it's fast, good network, open access. So it checks a whole bunch of the boxes, right? But it just doesn't check all the ones we were talking about. Go ahead, Tara. So the city has formally requested proposals from whoever's interested in making a proposition. We publish it. Can't remember the name of the system, but it's any contractor in the world is watching that system every day because a new government's going to make a proposal for requesting a bid or something. So we've opened it up for everybody to come in and make solutions to us, and they may come up with a solution that's different than this. And the city council may look at it and go, wow, we hadn't considered that before. Maybe that's a better option for us. I'd like to think that we did a pretty good job. We asked a lot of questions from a lot of people over a long time. We went back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And we settled on this because it just makes the most sense from our point of view. What the council decides, I can't make you any promises. I can't tell you. I'm not here to speak for the whole council. I can just tell you what the task force recommended. Right now, based on what I've seen for residents of my district, if you're interested, I would support this option and moving forward in that direction. In the absence of any new or differing information, that's where I'm leaning. But there's still a lot of information to review, I think, before we're ready to make that final decision. If you guys have an opinion one way or the other, this is a great time to reach out to your representatives in the council and explain what your feelings are. The survey, like I said, it suggests there's a lot of support for this kind of idea, but the questions I don't think were specific enough about would you accept a municipal public-private partnership with an opt-out, $10 a month fee, all that kind of stuff. We didn't quite get to that level of granularity. Go ahead.
Does the proposal include anything about data caps? Because like with Xfinity right now, I'm paying $30 a month just to get unlimited data.
So the question is about data caps. There's a lot to be negotiated, but I don't think we would be interested in supporting that. However, if it's an open source network, a provider could come in and say, we'll do it for $42 a month, but there is a cap on data. Or we'll do it for $70 a month and there's no cap on data. We would expect there to be various solutions. Even within the same company, they might have various plans, right? So in general, there would be an option to not have those, but there may be appealing options for some consumers where that would be a good trade-off for a cost savings.
So in the concept of smart city, there's also publicly accessible wideband network accessibility throughout cities. Is that part of any of this, or is that lots talking about a little separate from what this is?
From what our proposal is, that's something separate. But from my limited knowledge about that, which I'm going to confess is pretty limited, it's not super hard or expensive to deploy that kind of a system. And the good thing is, though, that we would be one of the leading cities to not only get, so most of the 5G that we get for our cell devices is actually an enhanced 4G network. It's not truly a 5G network. With the broadband infrastructure, we could immediately go way past full 5G to 6G and beyond. It's already in the ground. When they want to go to 7G or 8G, it's already in there. All we got to do is change some components and it's ready to go. There's no new tearing up the streets. There's no new pipe that needs to be laid. It's the same fiber. And now there's even new technology they say they'll be able to do. I don't want to misquote it. I think they're saying they can take the same single fiber strand and increase the amount of data in it 100-fold with, it's a combination of digital and analog where they can change the brightness of the beam, not only the pulses, but the intensity of it to create even far more robust transmissions down a single strand of fiber. It's amazing. Say petabit? Woo! That's smoking. Yeah. Just in case there's anybody at home who couldn't hear that, he's saying that technology in Japan using laser system was able to deliver 50,000 two-hour movies across a fiber network in 1 second.
Of course, the lasers are millions upon millions, so it's just
Right.
the technology across one whole strand of fiber you can push. It's insane.
Yeah, it's the same fiber they were putting in the ground in the 80s. It's the same technology. Yeah. It's using that network and just getting faster and faster and faster. So the future of that, based at least on Dr. Rickert's projection, was it would be a viable active utility for at least 50 years. Yeah, at least 50 years. So let's start Paul in the back.
So, excuse me, when you talk about every business owner and every resident of Herriman, what does that mean for people who are in multiple unit developments, like an apartment complex or a townhome? Is it to the building or is it maybe for every renter?
So there's some questions that still have to be worked out there. Some of that is based on, those are private property HOAs most often. And we can't force a service into a private community or private property. Does that make sense? We will have to talk to each individual HOA. Some of them have contracts with a single internet service provider, and they may not be interested in having us bring it in. So we'll bring it up right to the edge of the community, and they'll have to decide if they want to let it be installed or not. And they'll have to decide whether or not that violates their contracts and whether or not we would have to buy the network from the other person to make it work. I mean, there's so many options, but no, we could not collect a fee from somebody who's not getting any service. Go ahead, Terry.
Is there a date that the city's trying to finish this by? Because it's already been 18 months you're working on it.
Yeah, so in theory, if we started tomorrow, best case scenario, that means no supply chain issues, no contractor issues, no problems, no financing, none of that stuff. Entire city could be lit up in 3 years. More than likely, it's between 4 to 5 years to have it completely done. One of the things we're talking about is if you do an opt-in option, yeah, it would be the last ones to go. With an opt-out option, we can contract with the provider to target certain areas first. And that would be our plan. Well, our plan would be to get the service to areas that don't have any options or quality service now. Does that make sense? We would likely be targeting a couple of different places at the same time, but one of our priorities is to get that service to places that don't have it yet. Councilmember Orrin lives in an area where she has crappy internet. It's just Sherry. Yeah. Yeah, crazy, right? But that's one of the things we specifically talked about was how do we get it to those areas and how do we make it happen? By having the utility model with the opt-out, we think that gives us the ability to control where we start and prioritize certain areas. And so we can't just prioritize the most sparsely populated areas because it won't generate enough revenue fast enough to service the debt. So we have to balance that. We have to balance some of that. Have you been in a debate with Sherry? She's scary, man. Yeah. And I definitely appreciate your concern, and it's a valid concern. But we did consider that, we have talked about it, and we believe we can provide a reasonable accommodation to prioritize those areas. That's the best answer I can give you yet, because between now and the time we would be ready to go, there's a lot of ground to cover.
So going back to the fee discussion, is it you start paying the fee when you're turned on? Or
Yes.
start paying it ahead of time?
You would pay when you get turned on. When it gets to your house. Again, you could pay the $10 a month, basic, and just choose to keep your old service. They might cut the fee so low and give you great service, and they'll, I would very much expect that, to be honest with you. If I were Xfinity and I knew a broadband administrator was coming in, I'd cut my fees to $20 a month for 2 years, and we'll give you the fastest stuff and the brand new equipment, and woohoo. I think that's a win for the residents if they, you know what I mean? Yeah, it's right. But that's the whole thing, is that by increasing the competition, we think there's a net benefit much greater than that $10 fee to all the residents. And that's part of the discussion we've been having as a council, is trying to help all the members of the council see and accept that as a possibility. You don't want to come in and have to vote for a fee increase. It's not nice. We don't want to do that. We don't want to burden our families. I think the reality is we think we can lower costs by doing this. At the very least, we can enhance service for the same cost. Go ahead.
So the gentleman we talked about, it's the Herriman.
Dr. Reichert, yeah.
So would he, two questions, would he, you think based on what you know of this individual, would he go to the public municipality?
I don't want to speak for him, but I can tell you that he said municipally owned broadband is really important.
My second question, though, is this debate over then, in terms of where we landed here on the spectrum of public-private
It's still open for debate. This is the recommendation the Internet Task Force made. Right. Right. And I think, again, I don't want to speak for Sherry or commit her to anything, but we both made this recommendation. We both had some different misgivings about it. I think this is right, but I don't like this. She said, I think this is right, but I don't like that. And we had to resolve some of those issues and figure out how to do it. But I think we both stand behind the recommendation we made.
So Herriman's way behind on this. I mean, you look at the cities surrounding Herriman. Riverton announced Google Fiber. It's being built right now.
Yep.
In fact, there's nodes going in to provide Google Fiber to Riverton residents right now.
It's true,
Well, but I'm just saying there's hubs going in. They're starting, the point is they're starting construction.
Right.
Herriman hasn't even made a decision yet. We're still waiting for you guys to make a decision. It's been 18 months.
Yeah, and
How long do we have to wait?
yeah, it's a reasonable complaint. We could, Google wants to come into Herriman. We could say yes. And they would be happy to get boot. No, what I'm saying is they could come in and do it right away. Utopia wants to come in, they could do it right away. The reason why it took so long is how do we find a solution that isn't just quick and sounds good and fixes one problem, but it doesn't address all the other issues. That's the thing. If you're a city and you say, Google, come in, there's nothing wrong with Google. It's a quality network, a good company. They're going to put in infrastructure in the city. They're going to light it up. People are going to have good service. They're going to be happy with it. City doesn't own the network, and the city's not going to use it to enhance services and operations for the city. It's not a municipal owned, it's a private owned.
My complaint is, because I've talked to a few council members,
Yeah.
I feel like we're in analysis paralysis.
I
How do we move
would
forward?
agree.
How do we get the city to decide on our option and actually
We-
start installation? 'Cause that's
We will be at a point of making a decision end of September. I think September 15th, we'll have all our proposals in. We'll go through a review process. The task force will get back together, review the proposals and bids, and make our recommendations to the council of which ones we need to have further conversations with. I'm not going to say that.
There'll be a contract negotiation process that we'll have to go through.
Yeah, and then we have to worry about how to get the funding, which takes some time. There's a process the municipality has to go through with bond parameters and creating a new entity and votes and notices and all this kind of stuff. So it is a little bit of a cumbersome process. I'm optimistic that we could have a solution and be ready to start putting hole in the ground in the spring, 6-8 months. And then depending on which contractor, depending on supply chain issues, depending on the topology, depending on all that kind of stuff, I think it'll be complete 3 to 5 years after that. But I think honestly, I think it's going to be fantastic. I think we get the best of everything with not only I guess the one thing I would say is high-speed internet is one small piece of what this system would do. So yes, it provides a quality, open access, high-speed internet backbone. And that's awesome. That's what we all want. But it also provides all the other enhancements and services for the municipality, not only now, but in the future. It provides a revenue stream for the city in the future. It provides an automatic network refresh. It gives the city control over the operator to making sure that we can hold people accountable for the quality of services being done. As a utility, they'll have the opportunity to add or take off providers on that network based on certain service level contracts that they have to meet. If they're not meeting certain obligations, we can kick them off the network and get somebody else. So there is some advantages to the city by having all of those things. But yeah, it's a pain in the butt. It's taking a little long. But I'm frustrated too. I live here. I want this better system. Trust me. Listen, I've worked at home for 22 years, man. I'm on internet calls and video chats and huge data downloads. I work in mortgage banking. I've got files and spreadsheets that make my head explode. Huge data transfers, and getting in and out of those files over a VPN via, it's a pain. And then when you're done, trying to get it back is 100 times longer. So I feel the pain. I want to make an answer quick. But we had this conversation right at the very beginning, is that we're talking potentially a decision of $50 million or more that affects every business and resident in this city. I'm okay with it taking a little time to make sure we do it right. I think it should be a deliberative, slower process to make sure we're spending that kind of money and having that level of impact on our city and doing it the right way. I still wish it was faster.
Steve, how much of the infrastructure, the fiber has already been laid throughout the city?
I couldn't give you any accurate. There's some. That's as close as I can get. Yeah, there's some, right? And there's conduit laid to pull it through in some places too. So it's not going to be super hard at everywhere, but one of the things that goes with this is a technology called micro-trenching, where they basically dig a, 18-inch ditch that's like 2 inches wide, and they roll it in there, and then one of the concerns our engineering staff had was how they fill that in and cap it, and whether or not that would create breakdown in our roads, right? That's not something that we want to have happen. So our engineering staff actually did some research about fill materials and top and how it all works and what's the most long-lasting stuff and how it would affect our road maintenance costs and all that kind of stuff. So that's all part of the consideration as well. Well, I couldn't tell you. They said all these magic words and numbers, and I said, sounds good, but yeah.
And we're learning a lot about what not to do.
Yeah.
Rather than stop where we're standing. So we're learning from their mistakes.
Yeah, we've seen interesting trenches going circles out in the streets and having trouble trying to figure out where to put the vaults in certain places because you can't put them in certain places. There's obstacles, and there's public utility easement issues that come up. You know something about this, right? It is. I think there's a benefit, say learn from mistakes, others if possible. I think taking a little time has allowed us to avoid some of the mistakes some of the other communities have made.
So quick question, when it comes to the actual tie-in to the backbone of the internet, where I know we're making tie-in, are we making certain that there's multiple tie-in points to make it more of a grid system rather than a single point of failure? Is that all part of this assessment?
I can't speak to that specifically because we don't have a specific topology designed yet. Part of this bid process is getting that system designed. One of our key consultants as part of our task force is the original head of Utopia. He has come in and given us a lot of quality information about some of the things they've done well and some of the mistakes. He's consulted with Lehigh, with Heber, American Fork, pretty much every municipality in the states talked to him at one point or another about how they should set up their networks, what they should do, some pitfalls, things to avoid. And he'll continue to serve in that role with the city as we move forward in design issues and some of the, you're getting way over my head, but actual, what were they, EPROM, like all these different ways of building the network and the infrastructure that goes into it. We've had conversations that went way down rabbit holes. I can't even fake that I know what I'm talking about with any of that stuff. But just in a general sense, I can tell you there has been a lot of consideration about what kind of network it should be, what the topology should be, what kind of materials and infrastructure should go into it, and the redundancy of it to make sure that it runs all the time.
You made a recommendation to the city. What's the likelihood that they'll actually say, let's do this?
40%? You got two out of five? I think it depends on what these bid solutions come in at, and what people are recommending. Sharon and I have an advantage over the other members of the council in that we've been talking about this for 18 months. They're into it 2 months. And there's a lot of stuff to consider and digest and get through and try and figure out in your head before you're ready to take a vote on something that could potentially cost $50 million or more, or could put a utility fee on every resident of the city. It's not easy. They're not easy decisions, and I don't necessarily want to rush them, but I'm going to gently encourage them to make a decision soon. I mean, all this information is going to be reported back to the council. We'll be able to talk about these kind of questions and be able to express that there's a sense of we need to get this done now. I mean, Councilman Henderson was back here for a little bit. I talked to the mayor last night and this morning. He wanted to come. He just thought if we're going to have a couple other council members here, it gets a little weird if more than 2 council members are in one place at one time for too long. It's Open Public Meetings Act stuff. So we try not to have more than 2 of us at a time. So, but he's going to watch this. We'll talk about it. He and I were talking throughout the day about this. So the best I can tell you is we want to have it done. We know there's a need for a solution. And I would expect us to be pulling a trigger on a solution in the next, 45 days or so? Something like that. Just keep your eyes peeled. Watch all of our city council meetings. They're super exciting, riveting.
Point of clarification.
Yeah.
When you say we want to have it done, are you talking about you two or are you talking about the council?
The entire council wants to find a solution. Absolutely. That's why they set up this task force in the first place. I think going in, we thought it takes a couple months, we'll come back with an answer and we'll be ready to go, right? We thought we'll talk to the 3 or 4 or 5 big guys and pick one and go. But I think gratefully and rightfully so, we spent a lot of time going through this. We dug deep. And I think that the solution we have is better because of it.
I'm going to ask a stupid question that everyone's going to...
No stupid questions.
Oh, you don't know me.
There's a highly likelihood of stupid answers because I'm the one with the microphone, so.
So, obviously, we're talking about what the best option is to create a fiber network within the city of Herriman. I get that. What is the alternative of not? Meaning, if we were just to say, like, I can't complain about Comcast. I'm in a newer area. Everything's fine. But I do know that there's areas that do need it. If we were just to let the market do what it does, with maybe incentivizing utilities to come and support areas that need that infrastructure improvement, is that something you guys have considered, or at least viewed and looked at?
We would love for private company to come in and provide solutions to customers that don't have solutions right now. But we've been waiting on that for 22 years. And there's not enough of a financial incentive to do it. On the other hand, what you're suggesting about is, enhancing or enticing or subsidizing something like that being going on. It puts a burden on our taxpayers to incentivize a private company to provide services in areas where they're not going to be providing services to other areas. So how do we fairly tax all of the residents to do something like that? You see, it gets more complicated, opens up more questions with each potential solution. And so we've gone down that rabbit hole of what if we did this, and then there's this consequence, and this consequence, and this thing, and that, and that's why we settled where we did.
Can I help answer that?
Go ahead. This is open discussion.
The legacy carriers will do nothing.
Yeah, that $12,000 cost, who was it that talked about? Yeah, said to come back and add it later is $12,000, right? Imagine that times 1,000 homes. How many months of $30 or $50 a month do they have to collect to pay for that kind of an infrastructure investment, right? It's just never pays for itself. So there's no incentive for them to ever do it.
Comcast or Xfinity or whatever, for 283 feet from their box, more than $12,000.
Yep.
Because what they've got is
Per house. Per house. And they want you to pay it because they don't want to pay it. They'll provide you service. They just don't want to pay to go back and build infrastructure to your house. That's where the expense is to bring all the machines and the contractors and the permits and all the stuff to go in and dig the trenches and lay the cables and do all that stuff. It's expensive. Paul knows a little bit about this. It's expensive. But
So I wouldn't say there's no private companies trying to do it. Because I own a country net, so a small ISP in the west part of Herriman.
Yep.
And they're working with the process to try to move into Herriman. But I'm peanuts compared to Google or anyone else.
Right.
You know, I have a plan to cover about 1,000 homes, 2,000
Oh.
homes. So you know, it's not that it isn't happening. I have a permit that I'm trying to do right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. To your point, yeah, a legacy carrier has a different model than you would. Right.
you're trying to help see it, see it and feel it, and that's
Yeah.
awesome.
What is the, just as a dumb question, what is the proportion of that? I mean, what is the number? Is it 500 homes? Is it 1,000 homes? Is it? There's
For-
a lot of new Herriman.
for what?
That's what my question is.
Customers that answered.
I'm not sure I understand the question. Tell me, say it again.
The proportion of homes that are dealing with 20 megabits rather than,
Oh, that's a good question. Problem is we've added so many new homes in the last, 5, 8, 10 years, and most of them have Xfinity in there, which is what most people have, and they're fairly satisfied with it. But I don't know if it's. I don't want to interpret or say anything. I don't know that it's satisfied or resigned. I mean. Right. I don't know, right? Yeah. And again, I don't necessarily have huge complaints. I have Xfinity. I think it's pretty good service. I'm not down very often. Yeah, right. It's not cheap, but.
I guess, this looks like to me an answer looking for a problem. And I'm not suggesting it's not the right direction. I'm just trying to understand what the net problem.
Yeah, I think I understand. Remember, our primary assignment as a task force was to find a solution for every home and business in the city. That was our overarching mandate from the city council, was to find that solution above all. And so if that's where you're starting, it eliminates a lot of other choices, right? Waiting for the private companies to do it just isn't going to happen. Or at least not happen for a long time. Yeah. Right. Well, statistically speaking, that's a pretty statistically significant sample. You can extrapolate with a certain margin of error. That's representative of the whole city. Right. Yep. There's another part about this that we haven't talked about, and I think it's a little bit of a tangential talk, and I don't want to take too much time because we're about what we said we were going to be tonight. And it's the economic development side of having a broadband infrastructure. Businesses are looking to locate in communities that have fiber optic broadband networks. Theoretically, without any other enhancements, we could potentially provide certain businesses up to 10 gig connections. That's a big advantage over a lot of other communities. We need businesses. We need employment centers out here. We need a sales tax revenue generating base out here. We need to grow that. We're doing a good job. We have exciting things coming. Oh, I want to say, but I can't. There's really good things coming for the city, amazing things that are going to generate a lot of tax dollars for the city, really help budgetary things as we go forward, make us less reliable on one-time money and fully sustainable on ongoing sales tax revenues. But it's not enough yet. If we're going to grow and be a mature city and be self-sustaining and have employers and services and all the things that we want as a community, this is going to help do that. So there's a whole economic and business side of it that we didn't even get into, but I think it's just as important as anything else we talked about.
I think you nailed it. Like us doing this, it's scalable, it's completely future-proofing the city.
Yep.
In many aspects, and I think that people forget that aspect of everything we're talking about.
Yeah, because there's a person I spoke to who said, I don't care about any of this. I just don't want to pay more than the $45 a month I'm paying right now. That's all they were worried about, is how much their internet service was going to cost at their house. Like, this is all I use it for. This is how much I pay every month. I don't care. I don't want to vote. I don't want anything to change that would change my $45 a month. It is, but again, right. As a council, we have to take a bit of a broader view, right? We're representing all of the residents of the city, not just one. But we also represent the interest of that particular resident just as much as we do all the other ones who want other services, right? And we have to balance all of those needs and desires. And that's why I think this is a good option, is that there's potentially service levels that would be adequate or enhancements to what that person is already paying at a price point pretty close to what they're already paying. So we think that's achievable, as well as all the other things that it achieves too. But to your point, yeah, the value of the network itself is going to be astronomical in 10, 15 years. People will pay the city to use the network. The forecast that I'm seeing, the values we're talking about, it will be worth 20, 50 times what we paid to install it. I mean, $500 million, what it might be worth down the road. I don't think that's a stretch. Sorry, my kids are calling me.
Just one comment.
Yeah.
The future.
Yeah.
How many streaming services do you have in your house? Disney.
Too many.
Netflix. Like, our current infrastructure does not support the future of how we're going to use our internet. This solution will give us the future proof we want for Herriman. Private companies are not going to come in and give us the solution we need to support the future technology we're going to use. That a lot of residents probably don't even grasp where we're going to be in
Agreed.
the speed of technology change in 5 years from now.
Agreed.
If
Sherry,
we wait 5 more years to do this.
could I get you to come in for just a sec? My kids and wife are blowing my phone up. There might be something I need to answer here real quick. Just help with the Q&A for a sec. I'll be right back.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's hard to be in this position because there's certain things when we went down this rabbit hole, because I was not interested in having the city be responsible for giving every resident internet. That was my take on it. It was like, why? There's private companies that do this. Why does the city have to get involved in this? Because that's how I always feel. I think government should stay out of the way of private market. And so I did not want to do that. The only way I was supportive of this is because it does what you're talking about. It upgrades us to a different level. We can call Google Fiber and they would start coming in probably tomorrow. But it does not provide the broadband infrastructure that was really the goal if the city's going to get involved. So I think that this path that we've been on has been long and windy and really extra long and windy, but I think that we're getting to the better solution. But I think that if all we're doing is trying to figure out how to make each home have better Netflix, it's not our job. Our job is to provide essential services for our residents. The private market should be providing entertainment, not government. And so I can't go down that path very well as far as we don't get fast enough streaming. You guys have to do something about it because the private market should be doing that. But if it's an opportunity for us to really enhance our city and provide better services for our residents that will help drive down costs for water and all those types of things, then I can get behind that and I can talk about that. So that's.
I would say that along those same lines, that line of thought, I totally understand where you're coming from. The gentleman, what he's saying, I agree, because if we think about water, potable water to everybody in the city, that's a necessity.
Mm-hmm.
Like, nobody's going to say here, I can live in my house without having potable water. Mm-hmm. The problem is that people are not making that shift in their brain that internet is like potable water at this point. If I don't have internet in my home today, I'm unemployed. My wife is unemployed, and I can't afford where I live.
Right.
So it's a necessity.
Right, exactly. And
Communication,
yeah, for sure.
education.
And that's just, everything else you mentioned is gravy. Having a business expect that level of service when they come in.
Right.
And they're not coming in because of that, we're losing out on sales tax.
Right.
To your point.
One of the things that, so when the internet came out, it was a luxury. It is now a utility. It has to be a utility. And one of the things that, I forget your name, I'm sorry.
Steve.
That I really like that you talk about, because I've tried working with this, is being able to connect EMS services and everything else in a far larger network. So that way, you know, maybe the fire truck can't get that radio call out because they're in a certain spot. But
Right.
they've got a little tower that's sitting up on a light post that connects to the rig and, you know, blah, 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 blah. So now they can get that rig. There's,
Yeah.
you know, yeah, I work for someone who's in private, but, you know, at the end of the day, I got services here in the city.
Yeah, we have that with the police department, have dead spots too, and this would eliminate those. That's why it makes sense to make it somewhat of a utility model, because then that way there's a citywide benefit for everybody. There are people like Sherry. It's like, I live on 10 meg. I don't know what it is. I just don't, but I don't have to depend on the internet. I utilize it for city business and things like that. I can get my emails, I can stream. I don't care what my kids are doing. They don't need to be playing games.
Well, I just looked you up and you're my elected council person, so you've got my
and Steve's point, you know, I think from not the very beginning, but as we started going, he was very concerned about the smart city idea, and then that makes sense, because then it's because I'm not interested in giving everybody a fee in this city for something that doesn't benefit them, because there'll be people like me that can get by on 10 meg, right? And there'll be people like you that can't afford it because they'll be unemployed if they don't have it. But if everybody can benefit, which they would, if we can use essential services like our police, our fire, water, those types of things, and benefit from the cost of those types of things, then it makes sense to me.
I also think it's important to remember in terms of the private-only model, we're geographically limited because of where we live. We're not a pass-through community. They have to bring it out to us with no incentive to make money further down the line.
Sure.
If you were in Draper, they go through you to get down to Utah County. But in Herriman, they don't. There's no reason for those legacy carriers to come out and service us and service every home and business in our city, because we're the end of the line.
Well,
There is now, though.
No, but I would say less incentive.
Yeah, because we're growing at such a rapid pace, and what you'll watch is this belt. You're going to see this Olympia Hills and all this west side. So rather than going that way, they're going to be able to go this way because the west side's going to develop. So there's more incentive for them to come. And every time a new subdivision is approved, more and more and more incentive for them to come. But yeah, for sure, for sure. But yeah, to backfill in the old holes, yeah, for sure. Here's your mic back.
Oh, you're good. She's way better than I am. I hope we've addressed a lot of it. I know there's been so many questions. What are we talking about? Why are we talking about it? What are you thinking? Where's the city stand? I hope that this answered a lot of those questions. I know there's going to be people watching this recording later, and they're going to go, how do we possibly elect that guy? I'll deal with that later. Look, it's only so exciting to have this conversation, right? It's a lot of minutia, it's a lot of details, it's a lot of questions and boring answers and stuff. I just hope that at the end of the day, when we've considered all of these things we've considered, that I think you guys understand why the task force made the recommendation they did, and why I at least from my point of view, I think we're hopefully going to go in that direction.
I just wanted to add, and I know we're going to close soon, is I really appreciate you guys made it very transparent, because I've watched all the YouTube stuff, I've watched your debates amongst yourselves, and I appreciate that you made it so transparent. And this forum is phenomenal. Like, this is why I love living in the city. So.
Yeah, you're welcome, and I'll just take a chance to give big kudos to Tammy and her staff. She's our communications officer and assistant city manager, and her staff does an amazing job of being able to utilize all the technology we have. You can see we have cameras installed around the room for different meetings. They work to stream things and upload and create all the cool, the announcement for this. Not me. They did that so we could get that out to everybody. So good job, Tammy. Thanks for that. That goes to her.
Plug in that, make sure that you're plugged into our agendas so that you know when this is going to be spoken and you can come to those meetings, listen, and watch online.
Yeah, those are all posted on our website, and you can also sign up through public notices. They'll notify you every time a new agenda is posted, and you should get an email about it. But pay attention in the next few weeks. You're going to... Next Wednesday night, I just saw the agenda today. There's something about internet on there, right? There's a discussion about it. So there will be a discussion next Wednesday night about some of this stuff. And then 2 Wednesday nights after that, 2 weeks after that, I think we will have some of the initial feedback from the bids. So there's going to be a lot moving forward in the next several meetings. Any other questions? I'm happy to stay and answer them. Or I'll make Sherry come up and answer them. She's more interesting. Sherry's more direct and no nonsense than I am. I tend to meander, and as my wife tells me, there's no good definition of the word verbose. So, okay. Well, thank you, everybody, for coming. We'll go ahead and close the meeting, but I'll stick around if there's any other questions you guys have. Thanks so much for coming.